Hey everybody, and welcome to Influitive Live 2020 and our Fireside Chat series. My name is Dan Kalmar, and today I'm joined by Rachel Smith, Advocacy Marketing Manager at TIBCO. Rachel, thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
So Rachel and I are going to be talking about getting internal buy-in for advocacy. And Rachel has so many great thoughts around, buy-in isn't this just set it and forget it thing. We're going to dive into all that great stuff. But Rachel, I'd love to kick things off for the folks at home, just learning a little bit more about you and TIBCO, and then also your program, the TIBCO League.
Yeah, sure. Great. So I'm Rachel Smith, like Dan said, Advocacy Marketing Manager at TIBCO Software. I'm actually a five-year Influitive veteran. I've been a program admin for 5 years, both at Influitive or at TIBCO, and at my last job. So really excited to be here speaking at Influitive Live. It's like a dream come true. But I do have a background in digital marketing, and I could go ahead and talk a little bit more about TIBCO itself. So if I just have one sentence to talk about what TIBCO is and what it does, it's that TIBCO software allows companies to connect, unify, and predict real-time data to make faster, smarter decisions. So that's kind of who TIBCO is and what we do. Feel free to ask me more about that in the chat afterwards if you want. But I can also talk a little bit about the TIBCO League, which is our advocacy program. So it was actually born as a developer advocacy program, but quickly expanded to engage our customers amongst some organizational changes, which I'm excited to talk about what buy-in looks like during a situation like that when maybe some of your leaders are changing. It is, like I said, it's the second hub that I've worked on. But owning the strategy and really being the spearhead for the success of this hub, the TIBCO League, has been a real eye-opener for me. I didn't do that in my last role, so it's been a really great growth opportunity for me as well. So lots of lessons learned to share today. The TIBCO League is actually almost 2 years old now. And if I had to say its one purpose, right, is to bring value to our advocates outside of a sales or support context, and really nurture them into content and thought leadership curators for our Voice of Customer team, which is the team I actually sit on here at TIBCO.
So let's dive into buy-in. We'll get into the recurring side of things, but there's that early day buy-in that needs to happen. And so sometimes it's actually, hey, making the case for a platform like Influitive, but it's not always that. So tell me a little bit about your early day buy-in experiences at TIBCO.
Yeah, sure. So TIBCO actually launched the TIBCO League, or our instance of Influitive, maybe 3 or 4 weeks before I joined the company. So I wasn't actually part of that initial buy-in for like purchasing Influitive, but something that I can really speak to is honing that strategy and those goals and really creating a lot of synergies internally around that. That was fully on me when I joined. So it was a really interesting process. The league first sat on the digital marketing team, and that's the team that I was hired into. And it was really just an effort to explore advocacy in general, and our CMO at the time wanted to start with our developer audience, since we do have some products that engage our developers. So that's kind of how it started. And then when I joined, I started to shift that strategy from exclusively just developers to include our customer audience as well. And in doing that, I made some really great connections with our Voice of Customer team. Within a couple months of working with them to launch to our customers, I saw that their focuses, their goals, their team culture really were a lot more conducive to the success of the strategy that I had built and the goals that I wanted to reach. And then ultimately would lead to a more successful engagement with our customers and a better experience for them. So it's within that time period where I was working more with the Voice of Customer team and launching to our customers that I ended up getting recruited onto that team. So that's actually now where I sit. So that was a really interesting buy-in experience, not only getting the buy-in for the strategy, but also finding, like I said, those buzzword synergies, I guess, and really understanding which team that I sat on. So I guess the moral of this buy-in fairy tale is that sometimes we really need a cultural and a goal buy-in, not necessarily a strategy buy-in. So the success of launching something new or making a strategic pivot is partially dependent on launching it in partnership with the right teams. I think that was a big thing for me at the beginning.
And I think it's really interesting because, you know, you're trying to do this, you're coming into it, you know, trying to transform this, but you're so new to the organization, right? Like it's not like somebody who's been at a company for 10 years, they know the company. If you had to give advice to somebody who's doing a similar thing, like what were the kind of the steps you took to understand the company, understand the customers, but also just like what teams need to be involved in this? Like how did you kind of build out that framework in your head in those early days when you were new to TIBCO?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think that has a lot to do with your mindset ultimately. Like, sure, you can come in and say like, oh, this is really hard. It's really hard to learn a new company and learn a new program and build this program and understand where it sits. Like, yes, it can be a very overwhelming thing. But ultimately, I found it really encouraging. I found it encouraging that I had fresh eyes on not only the company, but fresh eyes on the customer experience and the customers themselves. I could maybe see gaps that others hadn't seen because of like silos or leadership reorganization and things like that. So I think the big thing there for me was understanding that asking for buy-in isn't just getting people to understand why advocacy is important. Like most likely leaders already understand that. And you know, like breaking down silos is such a cliche, but a lot of the leaders already understand why advocacy is important and why it matters. What they need from you is to tell them what next. So like buy-in for me was not like, here's advocacy, are you in or out? It was like, here's advocacy, here's how I see it being successful. I really took it as an opportunity to fully own, like rediscovering the customer journey and where we could engage with them more, and really laying that out for leaders and maybe even executives that I was working with to understand how to build this strategy better. I was giving them the what next, not the reason why. And I think it's really important to note when you're doing which thing in the buy-in process. And I wouldn't have known that if I hadn't had my few years of experience with Influitive already and been to awesome events like this. So it was really important there for me to make the right buy-in ask and understand that they were relying on me to make those choices and spell them out for them, and then connect it to their success metrics and help build that business case that way.
I love that.
Yeah.
And so every company is going to change, right? Like if you're going to use Influitive for 5 years, even if you're at the same company, people come and go, companies get acquired, there's layoffs, everything happens. How do you deal with the recurring aspect of buy-in when, you know, leadership changes, for example?
Yeah, for sure. So I would say there's like 4 things that I did from a really executional perspective for enablement. I think sometimes people can get really wrapped up in enablement strategy and like building their own strategy out and communicating it well and things like that. And of course, that's a major part. But I think there are also parts of enablement and buy-in that can be really executional. So like for example, there's 4 different things that I did that I can highlight. So the first of which is I built a enablement course essentially on our internal enablement platform where a lot of our enablement sits, so like product enablement and on our sales plays and things like that. I built a course that sat on that platform that's kind of evergreen. So that's the first thing that I did. The second thing that I did is for those instances where that course maybe wouldn't have been effective for enablement for the purpose that I was using it for, I built out what I call an enablement organization chart. So I basically went through our entire company org chart and found the leaders and the teams that I needed to partner with for really specific projects for success for my programs. So things like sourcing content for the program itself. So I'm not a developer, I don't know that voice. So finding the people internally that could champion that persona for me. So finding those content creators internally versus finding people that could just recruit more advocates for me. So like on the sales side, maybe that are more customer facing. For those really strategic enablement sessions and buy-in sessions, I had this organization chart so that I would make sure I wasn't finding any gaps in my enablement strategy, and it helps me really execute well and make sure I was connecting in the right places. And then thirdly, we actually ran a sales spiff with our sales team after we launched our Salesforce integration, essentially just training them up on how to click the nominate now button. Like I know it seems like something that should be so easy, but unless you really like remind them over and over again that that button exists, make sure it's high enough on the contact page, and really getting our sales team involved in recruitment. That was one of the things we did. And then kind of the fourth thing that has been really interesting to do actually for the first time was our peer review program. So I also run our peer review program on the Voice of Customer team. So I actually built goals this year that encompassed both programs in one. So for example, sourcing new reviews from our advocacy program, but then also taking people who opted in as references when they left us a review online and inviting them to join the TIBCO League. So building goals that encompassed both of those programs and making sure that I was breaking down silos, even within my own job role, were really key to maintaining enablement and buy-in through any organizational changes or leadership changes or even team shifts that I was a part of, or that affected me and the people I was enabling.
So I want to learn a little bit more about that course that you created, because I think that that's such a good way to, I don't know, I think you need to approach buy-in enablement in so many different ways, but education is such a big part of it, right? Of just understanding, you know, what this is for people who aren't familiar with advocacy, but then also just like what this program actually entails, like why this is not just one small granular thing. It can impact so many parts of TIBCO. Tell me about that program a little bit. Like, is it available to everybody? Is it compulsory for anybody? Is it part of new employee onboarding? Like, where does this live in the life cycle?
Sure. So like I said, it sits on our enablement platform internally. And the way we actually started it was through a partnership with our customer excellence team. So it was an effort to enable all of the people that sit on that team, which is everything from like pre-sale engineers, customer success managers, value realization managers for like after they purchase and like defining value and making sure our customers are realizing that. So like all of those roles sit under our customer excellence team. So first I got some really great buy-in from the leaders of that team, and then realized that I would essentially just be repeating myself a bajillion million times if I tried to enable every person on that team. So what we did instead was we pivoted toward this idea of building out this enablement course to enable larger teams at once so that they can go at their own pace, so that by the time they get to me and want to talk about actually like partnering on projects or building really cool things in the league, in the program, they have a lot of really great momentum already, and they're kind of up to task on what the league is for, why we have it, how they can get involved, how it benefits their customers. I included in the course as well a bunch of demos. So I made sure to demo the customer view. I demoed our Salesforce integration so they could start nominating their customers. I demoed our mobile app, really anything you can demo to these teams to drive home the fun, gamified, access it anywhere, engage anytime pieces that Influitive has to offer, the more they get it. So that's really what that program started as, or that course started as, was just to enable that larger team. And then we realized its value for entirely across the organization. So I would say one thing that actually really helped when I was building out the message of that talk track, I guess, or of that course, was putting the engagement that we were already having into the eyes of into the perspective of a customer or one of our advocates. And then presenting it to those internal personas that way so they can see how impactful the program is for one of our customers. So we essentially had like a persona slide, and then we would choose one advocate, and we would talk about how many challenge completions they had, or when their last engagement was, how many points they had, did they tend to share on social more, or did they like to answer surveys more? Really diving into those individual personas to show these internal folks that our customers are already engaging, like help us write the story, help us tell the story, be a part of it, because your customers are already there. It's just a matter of you meeting them there. So including those in the talk track of the course, I think really helped form the full like buy-in message that we had in that course. So we kind of used it as both an enablement and buy-in tool. It helped a lot with driving momentum before people really got to me. They could go at their own pace. It's just really great to manage the bandwidth that way by using something like that course. So we're really excited about it. It's something that was a big goal for us this year, so we're glad to have it done.
Yeah, I would imagine that you probably felt pretty good once that was off of your plate and it was built and out in the world.
Sure.
And so when you're either creating this course or just talking to different people throughout the organization, do you find that you have to tailor your message based on where they live in the organization? Like, do you think buy-in is different for a sales team versus a marketing team, or is there always some kind of common ground between all these different people?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that they're different calls to action for sure. That's actually something I include at the end of the course. I make it really clear. It's a whole section, and it's called, quote, how you can get involved. And instead of just having a generic call to action of like, get your customers involved or reach out to Rachel on Slack, the really clear calls to action I've segmented out by internal persona, basically. So I have one slide that covers like a technical internal employee. So someone who is maybe on the product team or engages with developers. Those are the people that I ask them to help me source some content and help me source some language to share with the advocates. Then we move into a sales or a customer facing role. So the big call to action there is like, get your customers and developers involved. So that one's a recruitment ask. And then we have a marketing ask, which is also content related, but more from the perspective of helping us curate content around the league and from the league internally. So taking our voice to leverage it in other parts of marketing and content. So it's like not only a full journey buy-in ask, like next step for the persona that it's targeting, but it really clearly outlines like even down to like role or title. Like if you are a AE CSM, then you should get your customer involved, nominate them on the Salesforce with the Salesforce integration. So really clear calls to action, segmenting out those internal personas so that they know, one, what they should do, and two, who else you're working with internally. Like who else could they talk to about the league? Maybe they want to put their heads together with somebody and brainstorm before they come to me. Who else is working on this? What other roles am I talking to? It really helps them paint the bigger picture and understand where they fit.
And when you're talking to those salespeople and you're talking about next actions, does it always involve the spiff? Is it always about money?
It's
the best way to get salespeople to do anything, right?
It's not always about money, but it definitely helps. I will say we've done some enablement before. I think one thing we did for sales was we probably enabled in some form or another, maybe like 2 or 3 times before we really came to the targeted teams and offered up the spiff. So like, presented to them what it was, like remind, present it and remind again, and then tell them like, okay, now we're giving you money for this. Not
like, oh, okay, you have my
desperation, right? Not out of desperation, but we wanted to make sure it was really clear and like having that recurring cadence, I guess, always bringing it back up to the top, bring it back up to the top, until finally we like come in with the ask and say like, and now you're gonna get money for it. I think that helped.
So let's talk about common misconceptions when it comes to buy-in. I think people have kind of preconceived notions with this because they've tried to get buy-in for various different things. Like what do you feel like people are misunderstanding about buy-in?
Yeah, so it's like, if you take away anything from what I'm talking about right now, like I hope people just jump in for this like minute of me talking. But like bold, all caps, write it down, tweet it, get a tattoo of it. Buy-in is a buzzword, guys. Like I think buy-in is used everywhere for everything, but it means something different for everybody. So if you tell someone you're looking for their buy-in, do they even know what you mean? Because they might think that means something different than what you're trying to say. So it can mean something different in internal enablement, external, strategy-based, just like execution details, like being really clear on what you're trying to get them to buy into. just using that word leaves a lot up for interpretation. So being really clear about what you're asking for, and then even leading them to the answer that you want. Because again, you are the expert on this. They're looking to you for next steps. So instead of getting something like, yes, buy Influitive because we need advocates, get an answer like, yes, buy Influitive so we can build out a database of referenceable customers. Make it really clear what you're asking them for, make it really clear what business case you're trying to solve, and then have them basically say that back to you so that everybody's on the same page, you know exactly what you're doing moving forward, and there's no room for interpretation when you use the word buy-in. That's, I would say, the biggest misconception for me.
And so over your last 5 years of doing this, I'm sure you've done things that have really worked well, like the enablement course, but then I'm sure you've also had things where you're like, I would probably never do that again. What are some do's and don'ts when it comes to buy-in?
Sure. So I would say that I probably have two of each. So I'll start with the do's. Let's start with the good things.
Start positive.
Do over communicate and be transparent. I know people think that that's annoying, but being transparent about your successes and your struggles with all the close partners that you're building during this enablement, about exactly what you need from them, be transparent about timelines, deliverables, just be really clear, because the more over communication and transparency that you have, the more you're breaking down organizational silos and the more you're crafting a story of what your advocacy program can do across the full organization instead of just in the bubble you're working in. So definitely do be transparent and over communicate. I would say also, I kind of already hit on this already, definitely do build out evergreen enablement resources, like a course maybe, or like an organization chart like I had. Just if you feel like you're constantly repeating yourself in buy-in conversations, I have been there, I understand it's so tedious. Maybe you can pre-record some content in a video, even a 2-minute video, send it to people before the meeting. Type up some pre-meeting documentation or resources that you can use on a regular basis and just like update quarterly maybe as your strategy changes. So people can review them before you get on a call with them, so you can hit the ground running and really have that momentum when you start. So I would say those are my two do's for sure. One's a little bit more strategic and one's a little bit more executional. So hopefully that applies to a lot of people. And then on the don't side, so big don't here, we kind of already touched on this a little bit. Do not assume one conversation is all that it takes. Another like bold it, tweet it, write it down moment. Buy-in and enablement are not a point in time. It's a constant non-linear effort. It can even be cyclical. So don't assume because you got buy-in from someone 6 months ago, if you talk to them again, that they're gonna know what you're talking about, because they might have totally forgotten, honestly. So don't assume one conversation is all that it takes. Also kind of from that, another don't, do not forget to follow up. Right? So maybe those are the same, maybe they're not. It's really important either way. Momentum is key to internal advocacy enablement, since it is such a flexible, creative relationship building process, both building a relationship with your advocates and building relationships with your internal champions and partners. Your strategy could be really dynamic. And if you don't follow up after enablement, you'll just have to fully re-enable those people again. Except this time you have to erase everything you taught them last time and reteach them everything that's now obsolete. So not following up and assuming it only takes one conversation is just likely going to create more work for you in the future. So just follow up. I know sometimes we all hate the clerical work of following up, but it's really, really important to your buy-in and enablement.
And I think that that's such an important theme of this conversation that we've had today is that it's not just your job to get people to believe in this at the start. You have to keep making them believe. You have to keep them happy and keep them bought into this. And you know, that can be a lot of work, but I think it's worth it, right? When you see what you can ultimately do with a program like this, I think it's worth it to be able to do that. And it also probably makes, you know, next year when you're asking for budget for this again, it probably, because you've been chipping at this away for the year, it's more of a sign off rather than having to do this whole thing once a year.
Yeah, and I'll say too, like, I am what like sometimes I hear, I'm like a one-man show when it comes to advocacy at TIBCO. Like we're a large company, we're over 5,000 employees, we're definitely enterprise
Wow.
size. But I sit on a really great team, and I think that's why I can afford to be a one-man show. So that's one, like really important for that. If you are at a company and you are a one-man show, trust me, I have been there, I am still there. So like all the things that I'm saying, I did with the support of my team, but ultimately it was on me to execute that strategy, which is why I'm trying to like bring up things that are both like strategic executable, like strategic things you can do, as well as like things you can do like today, tomorrow, next week. Like I understand how overwhelming it can be when you're sitting watching someone like me talk, and you're like, yeah, that's all fine and good. Like, sure, I'm sure you're really successful, but how many people work for you? None people work for me. So it's just me. I've been there. I'm at a big company. It's been just me at a small company. And I think you learn over time. I think I wouldn't be where I am without Influitive and events like this and peers like the people that are watching this. I've learned a lot. But I think like it can be really frustrating, but don't let the fact that like it's just you, or maybe you're on the wrong team, stop you from finding your success. Really like do the work to set you up for success, even if you are a one-man show of advocacy. So yeah, I guess I would give that encouragement as well, because I have been in your shoes listening to someone talk from a huge company and they have like 5 people working for them, and a lot of what they're talking about isn't doable for me. So I'm hoping a lot of the tips that I'm giving you are doable for you, even if it's just you.
Yeah. And so to wrap this up, what are some of those quick wins that, the folks at home, there's long-term stuff that they can be doing like these programs, but what are a couple quick wins that they can do next week to move the needle on buy-in, whether it comes to, that initial buy-in or this ongoing buy-in?
Yeah, sure. So I would say I have like maybe 3. And of course I've talked about all of these already, but just kind of reiterate at the end of the conversation here though. First, creating measurable tools for enablement, because enablement can be such a loosey-goosey thing. It's almost like measuring advocacy, right? It can be really hard. So create tools that you can measure for enablement, like a training course where you can get feedback on the course, or creating evergreen resources where you can see how many people are viewing those, or an organization enablement chart like I have. So you can really track and make sure you're not having any gaps, understand how many enablement sessions you've done up until now and who you might be missing. So create measurable tools to measure your engagement around enablement and buy-in, as well as make sure you don't have any gaps. So that's one. Another, like I said, establish a culture of over communication. Have a Slack channel, have regular syncs with your internal partners, where you can really talk about your struggles and successes, so that they can't forget about you. Don't even give them the chance to forget about you. And then third, a big thing for me, again, being a one-man show, like delegate to partners that you trust. So I know that like one person working on an advocacy program at a company is really common. So really, as you're going through this process, figure out who really like gets it, who gets what you're trying to say.
Yeah.
Make them your partner and see how they can help you execute so you can keep owning the strategy. I guess those are my 3. I think some of them, some are a little more strategic, and then a couple are things you can execute on. So hopefully that's really helpful for people. But I think, yeah, if I had known those 3 things 2, 3, 4 years ago, I would be even further along than I am now.
Well, there you go, everybody. You've got your homework cut out for you, assigned to you by Professor Rachel Smith at the Buyin Institute. This is terrific, Rachel. I think you're wise beyond your years because of the last 5 years of doing this. I think there was so many really good takeaways and actionable steps. So thank you so much for your time, Rachel, and thanks everybody at home for joining us.